Hello, world. I'm Chris Pirillo here with the New Stack team. Today, we're talking about the cloud optimization, cloud cost optimization not being broken. It's the approach, which is a very interesting way of looking at it. So if you were thinking the former, maybe we're going to get you thinking about the latter. That's the whole idea behind the conversation that's about to play out. Today, we're having another talk with two FinOps domain experts from Harness, Ben Linares and Patrick Brogan. I color coordinated with a background over here. We didn't know that was going to happen. I just grabbed a shirt and like, oh yeah, that's right, it's green. So, and you know how hard it's been to save my coffee. Because I was sipping it just lately, but waiting for this conversation to play out before I, really started going at it. But it's decaf, so I'm not going to be bouncing off the walls. It's good to see you guys again.
You too, Chris.
Great to be here again. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
And I learned a lot the last time we talked about it, and didn't even know FinOps was a thing, which I guess a lot of people don't realize FinOps is a thing or was a thing and continues to be a thing, very relevant, increasingly relevant. But to kick things off, I thought we could start with, really defining what FinOps is for those who aren't already up to speed.
Sure. You know what? So FinOps, the foundation itself, has been around, I believe, since 2019, backed by the Linux Foundation. And FinOps are a series of practices and principles that apply to accountability for cost in the cloud. Now, while I think these things can be applied in many places, specifically FinOps focuses in the cloud, but you're starting to see it kind of grow and now move more into like data centers and on-prem. I think you're going to see an evolving movement with the FinOps group itself, simply because it's shown such incredible value. But that's kind of my take on it. I'm going to go ahead and give Patrick's, because Patrick works, I work in engineering and Patrick's worked on finance side, and we both bring a unique perspective to the FinOps. So I'm going to give Patrick a shot to tell how he sees FinOps.
But I love, for whatever it's worth, I love that. I love the fact that you almost have two disciplines and two backgrounds. It's almost like the Medici principle. Like, you've got your own, specific set of knowledge, and bringing it together, it's got to lead to some wild experiences for sure. Anyway, Patrick.
Yeah, it's really helped with our own synergy and experience working with our customers. But to me, if I look at sort of the origin of the word FinOps, the thing that I initially thought it was financial and operations, but it's actually a mashup of finance and DevOps. So, and that sort of gives you an indication of really what is absolutely critical and what is really core to any FinOps practice success, no matter your company industry, size, how much you spend on the cloud. It's all about, a culture of collaboration across the company. So certainly finance and DevOps teams, bringing your business partners in, or your business sponsors in, so that you're all looking at the same data, at the same piece of glass. While you may bring different priorities and challenges and problems that you're looking to solve, you want to be unified in your approach and understanding each other's perspectives. So to me, it's really that collaboration aspect of it is probably the most crucial part of a solid FinOps practice.
You kind of got me curious. I mean, we're talking obviously about FinOps and what it's like, kind of a collaborative experience within organizations, but are these typically siloed, like in small or certainly larger organizations? I'd imagine that presents challenges and has yielded the benefit of adopting FinOps.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen having run FinOps practices at two large financial institutions in the US, I've seen certainly the gamut of teams operating in silos and or sort of in the shadows, and others being front and center, having executive sponsorship coming down from the top saying, this is really a priority for our organization. And it doesn't matter if you're a technologist, an engineer in the company, or you own a P&L. Cloud cost is something that we now all have to take into account in our daily jobs. And that I think is part of the largest challenge in operating a successful FinOps practice, is just having that sort of buy-in and that sponsorship from the top. Ben,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Ben?
No, I think that's it. Patrick nailed it. It's interesting because at Starbucks, we were a grassroots FinOps department. We started off as a products and services under infrastructure and cloud. And it wasn't until, a little while later that I had been recruited that Patrick and I laugh about this, but you start Googling the things that you're doing and you're like, FinOps Foundation, what's that? And then you click and you're going, I'm doing this. All of this, I'm doing this. Not only that, it really expands with the framework that they have and all of the information that they have available. You're going, wow, this is exactly what I've been doing and thinking. And it gives you more of a foundational thing to build off of. And that's exactly it. We had to educate our leaders. Our leaders weren't aware of it. Mm-hmm. They really took notice once we started talking big numbers. Once you get to $1 million savings a month, they're like, hey, that's impressive. Once you start pushing $2 million a month, they go, wait a minute, this is incredible. And as you keep going, and we built that 8-figure annual savings, they started really going, hey, I want to know more. And so for us, we got lift and shifted. We went from working in infrastructure and cloud and got moved to the office of the CTO because now we needed that kind of visibility. They wanted to see, hey, we want to give you full reign over all technology so that we can help as many teams as possible. And Starbucks was a decentralized environment. So it was dozens of teams managing thousands of apps. And that in itself is a dumb challenge. But once you get leadership to recognize and understand and support the work that you're doing, it definitely makes it a little bit easier. Now, does it mean everybody's going to follow all the directions and all these decentralized teams are going to run to you? No, not necessarily. But as you start having small wins, you start seeing people starting to work with you more and more. And that was the momentum shift that we saw. Was we were no longer chasing people and having to market as much. They were now coming to us. And then we set up regular repertoires to which now we're meeting with our top 5 spenders almost every week. So it was neat to see the way it evolved, but it was certainly not I went to work for a FinOps department and then I had this role and responsibility. It was something that we created our own. And that to me was what was really special about it.
So, the title of the webinar, Cloud Cost Optimization Isn't Broken, the approaches. What does that mean? We obviously, on one side, we're looking to save money on the cloud, so to speak. But I guess there are multiple ways that one could approach it. How is the approach broken? Or how could the approach be done better, I should say?
No, that's a great question. And the idea is we do optimize, but it almost feels like every 30 days you're starting over with either a new optimization, you're chasing something else, and the idea is there should be so much more automation around this. Last month, the Gartner conference, I was great to sit down and see them specifically talk about the cloud cost management space. And they talked about 125 different products that are out there right now. But the only one mentioned that was in a shift left perspective was Harness. And I thought that is really a unique thing in itself. And it is the reason that truly had me leave Starbucks and come here. Was my bigger mission and goal was, how do I help more companies? I'd helped the company. We'd done great things, but how can I influence and help other companies? Where can I have, a part in this? Because I believed in the mission of the foundation so much that it came down to finding that right solution. And Harness was that right solution for me. And what I recognized was the best way to optimize is to do it in the early phases. You do it at the CI/CD level. You automate your infrastructure provisioning so that you have automatically structured rollouts and deployments that have been right-sized for the workload. You're not just allowing teams to go and pick what they want, because application builders do not build for optimized SKUs. They build for reliability, availability, and performance. That's your experience. If I'm using my app and it works flawlessly and there's no latency, yay. But there's a cost that comes to that experience, especially when you're talking about pushing things to the edge. Edge technology is not cheap. And the more you drive a customer experience, the more likely that experience can become very expensive. And this is where most organizations, I think, don't necessarily fail. They're just not seeing it the way that it should be seen. And we need to optimize out of the gate at the workload level prior to application release, and then ensure through consistency that we're seeing what we expect to see. If there's anomalies or anything that's abnormal, You isolate those, you break them down, you do your research to figure out what's happened, but then you resume the automation itself. And the automated piece is probably the hardest part. And I'll say that because tagging is still a very big challenge for so many companies. Patrick and I do a lot of work on research and understanding metrics and data, and it's 37% of companies have tagging better than 80%. Only 37% of companies can tell you what's being spent at 80% or greater, which means there's a huge ocean of organizations that simply can't tell you that. And that in itself is where your foundation is built. If tagging's not solid, well, how can you automate? You know, how can you go and actually apply the automation that will bring you this incredible value if you don't know what you're actually going to try and automate? So the reason for this,
I'm beginning to think that tagging is not the way, but that's a digression for another day. I won't hop up on a soapbox on that one. To me, when we talk about optimization not being broken, but the approach is, you know, I can point to 2 customers that I was on calls with this week who are looking beyond just basic right sizing and optimizations and, you know, committed use discounts, reserved instance purchases, et cetera, to lower the average rate that they're paying for services. And they're pivoting more to unit economics. And, you know, that's a very advanced capability in the lexicon of FinOps today, but I don't think it has to be. It's really all about how is every dollar that we spend on the cloud delivering some benefit to the company that, you know, has put a product out to the market. In the case of one of the customers, you know, they stood up a grassroots sort of rogue FinOps practice a couple of years ago. And in the first year, they saved $4 million. In the second year, they saved another $4 million. In the third year, finance goes, this is pretty cool. Can you save us another $5 million this year? And at some point, like you get to a point of diminishing returns, and you've harvested all of the low hanging fruit off of the trees and even been able to reach sort of the fruit that's blossomed higher up. But you may get to a point where you've achieved all the savings that you can. You've eliminated as much waste as possible. So how do you then pivot to redefine the value of a FinOps practice? And to me, that comes in defining what is the value that we're getting, whether that's, you know, reducing the cost per user, per transaction, per product shipped, whatever it may be, it's critical to be able to tie your cloud spend to business value delivered.
You know, Ben mentioned a phrase, shift left. Mm-hmm. And you move past it and harness was kind of like the standout. Like, what does that mean in relation to specifically shift left in relation to software development?
That's a great question. So in software development, typically as soon as the applications are getting ready to release, they need to provision their infrastructure. And again, they're building their applications for performance, reliability, and availability. So they're not going to provision the least lowest optimized SKU. They're going to go with something a bit more robust. They want to plan for the spike, right? They want to make sure that should there be a huge, you know, onslaught of users or consumers heading to the app and using it, they want to make sure that they have the infrastructure that can actually adjust to that can scale to that. And that becomes the challenge right there, is that they build high, but they never tend to really utilize that full infrastructure that's been provisioned. So the idea is at the workload level, like Harness does with CI/CD, you can actually put guardrails up that force them to use specific technology so that they're not getting these bloated, over-provisioned machines, or they're not getting this buying something that's just unnecessary because they're not going to be using it all. This allows you to set up that guardrail so that engineers can move at an incredible velocity and release, but don't have to worry about being infrastructure engineers themselves. They actually have the capability to put this in the beginning. It's already optimized. And then through the ability to do automation through things like right sizing, being able to understand when you need to downshift a machine, or building a scale set if you're going to have scale sets that allow your machines to add more users, or as well as be able to drop back down. The idea is your technology needs to be scalable, and it needs to adjust with what the workload demand is. And too many times what's built is just this huge lane. Think of it like a freeway, right? Freeways are the infrastructure. The cars are the application. Do the cars tell the road how to work? No. The infrastructure tells the cars or the applications how it works. You have speed signs, get off here, go this way. It's the same kind of concept from a technology perspective. The infrastructure should be dictating to the application or cars how they're going to conduct themselves on this. And that's where you get more control, is when you do it through a CDCI, an infrastructure as cloud management tool. You now have the ability to control that. You're putting constraints on the road that say, hey, you may have a Ferrari, but your Ferrari on this road can only go 25 miles an hour. Do you really need the Ferrari?
And sometimes applications don't always use their turn signals. Just saying. Sorry, Patrick.
No, I was just going to say I'd pick the Ferrari every time, no matter the speed limit. But to be frank, I don't have a lot to add there. I think Ben really covered off on what the value of shift left FinOps is, and automating a lot of the toil that engineers now have to sort of take on in this new responsibility. The power of cloud, and I say this frequently to our customers, the power of cloud infrastructure having been introduced, close to 2 decades ago now, is that it puts incredible power in the hands of engineers to spin up any service that they want at any time of day. And so that certainly accelerates innovation and value delivery for their companies. But the risk and the thing that they have to keep in mind is that power creates a risk as well. That is the risk, is that they have the ability to spin something up at any time, anywhere in the world, with very little governance or oversight, or even having to ask permission. And so what they have to understand is that, the age-old adage, with great power comes great responsibility. And so the more that we can do as a FinOps practice to sort of automate a lot of that responsibility, really just provides a benefit to the engineers. And I think that's really what Shift Left is trying to get towards these days.
Well, the way you frame it, it's almost like, what engineering team would not want FinOps? As you kind of stated, they could spin up any service, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, what kind of engineering team wouldn't want that? Like, what I'd imagine there's an argument against it, but I don't necessarily see it, but I'm not an engineer.
I think it's a different approach. I think the challenge is as an engineer, when you're in application development, the fact is you have a responsibility, and you're creating this app for a purpose, typically a business purpose. It could be revenue generating, it could be internal and supportive. But the fact is that it needs to work, and it needs to work consistently. A lot of times there's no focus, again, on the roads. There's only focus on the cars. So the applications are being built because they're purpose driven, right? The infrastructure is merely the thing that you're going to use to get there. It's not the vehicle, but it's that thing that you use to get from point A to point B. For example, without infrastructure, we wouldn't be using our cell phones. We wouldn't be utilizing the internet. We wouldn't, a lot of people don't think about it. And that's exactly the point, Chris, is they don't think about it. Now, people who have infrastructure background, people who manage infrastructure, network engineers, of course they think about it, but they don't think about it from the perspective of cost. Why? They think of reliability, availability. Is my network running? Is everything okay? Do I have any problems? They think of it as uptime, right? It's always about uptime for networks. Hosting companies boast, clouds boast, we're 5 nines. That is what they focus on. But I'm calling infrastructure leaders out to say, listen, infrastructure should be owning optimization. They should be owning this piece, because you're the roads that the applications travel on. Therefore, you dictate the rules. And the bigger challenge is you've got architecture and you've got engineering. Architecture sees it one way and engineering may see it another. But if they're not aligned, then what are they doing to present the right kind of roads for the vehicles or the applications? And that, to me, seems to be the biggest opportunity out there right now. FinOps comes as this thing between, finance and technology. But when you really look at it, infrastructure is really what it's all about. So it needs to reside with infrastructure, because that's where everything is happening. All the applications, all the third-party tools, all of the databasing, everything resides upon that infrastructure. So I think in the future, what you're going to see is companies who want to really get it right, infrastructure is gonna own that. They're going to have, and they won't own FinOps necessarily, but they'll have a big piece to dictate, hey, here's how we want these applications to function in our cloud, or here's how we want these cars to conduct themselves on the roads. We're going to set up rules. You know, we talk about guardrails and things like that. That's essentially what they are. No, you can't pick that high cost SKU because you don't need it. Therefore, here's one that you will need or will work for you. Therefore, you can utilize this one, and this will do more than what you need, but it's not this huge one that you were going for originally.
So sticking to car metaphor, sorry, how is zero drift different from shift left?
That's a good one. So zero drift takes it one step further. There's now the capability to actually do code level optimization. So when you're changing code, you can see the cost of code itself. This is where you're optimizing at code, you're optimizing at infrastructure, and you're completely automating what most engineers would be focused on. Your commitments, all of your provisioning prior to application deployments. The only thing that should be really, looked at should be oversight for anomalies. You can now, the technology is now available to go completely zero drift by being able to have structure around setting up guardrails for provisioning, setting up SKU limitations for application, for app deployments. You have these capabilities now, but it is a very big effort, and it needs to come from the top down. I talked about we were grassroots and we were a bottom up type organization. In order to do something like this is something that your C-level and your executive team and your senior leadership team need to be on board with. But in doing so, they will, you will eliminate so much waste, which is one of the top things that you see. I think it's like 32 to 35% of the cloud spend is waste. That's a big number. If you're spending 100 million in the cloud, that's a lot of money. If you're spending more than that, that number compounds itself. And the thing is week after week and month after month, if nobody acts on it, that's compound loss or waste. You're not capturing that back. You've lost it now. You're not going to be able to get that money back. So the more that they focus on a zero drift framework to eliminate waste, the better off they're going to be. And you spend less time because of the automation. It's consistent. So you don't have to babysit this thing consistently. What you do need to do is understand what technologies are going to be used. And FinOps department should be relatively close to not just technology, but like portfolios. If you have projects going on and you got a portfolio management team, FinOps should be brought in to start scoping out what are they going to be using? What does that cost look like? And then apply that to their forecasting practices. This way, you're starting to give the organization a heads up as you start looking at roadmaps as to what's cost going to look like and what are the expectations for the next 1, 2, 3 years.
Patrick, you're nodding along there.
Yeah, I think Ben raises a lot of interesting and valid points, and the thing that I'll add is when you think about those guardrails and the governance that cloud architecture wants to set out, and a lot of that can be derived from FinOps best practices, anomaly alerts, etc. I see the benefit of that as sort of reducing the mental fatigue that engineers would accumulate over time in their role. If you give them sort of a set number of configurations, whether it's for computer, storage, database, whatever it may be, that really reduces the amount of mental capacity that they have to invest in figuring out what's the right product and service for my application. And then, what may or may not break if I deviate from that. My wife and I joke, we call it the shampoo moment, which is when you walk into a grocery store, you need to buy a bottle of shampoo and you see you've got hundreds of options on the shelf. And you start thinking, well, I've got my tried and true one. It seems to be working fine. Maybe I should switch it up and see what else is new. But there's so many options out there that you just can't pick one. And so you end up walking out with the same old shampoo and it may not work for you any longer. And so I sort of see the same thing with cloud resources. There's so much to choose from. And so sometimes these governance guardrails really provide that focused sort of catalog that engineers can choose from. And again, that frees them up to continue to drive value and bring new, say, features to the market on the applications or the products that they're working on. So I see sort of additional benefits of a refined FinOps practice beyond just the dollar saved.
Well, lifting cognitive load, that goes a long way.
It really does.
A long way. Not having to think about something, or, you know, it allows you to focus. Well, there's another, and I can't remember where the story comes from, but like, you only have so many spoons in the day, and you'll burn through all your spoons by doing something that you're not necessarily used to doing, comfortable in doing. You'd rather be spending your time doing something else. I very often will burn through my spoons if I'm doing something like I don't know what I don't know. And then sometimes it stops you from progressing. So I can see that as a tremendous value inside of organizations, especially, you know, the drivers, if you will, at least with the software, the engineers, if you will.
Right. Yep. 100%.
So how do you define cloud value? And it's funny, every time I hear the word cloud, my dad refuses to have anything on the cloud. I'm like, I hate to tell him, like, it's already there now.
Everything,
but he's afraid of the cloud. I'm like, dude, if you knew, how do you define cloud value?
That's Patrick? I think Patrick's had a great perspective on this one.
Oh, what's that? Oh boy. Okay. Oof. I don't know why I've blanked a bit. Ben, why don't you lead the witness here? Or
sure. So I see cloud value is getting the most out of your dollar. Every dollar aligned, every dollar has a purpose. If we are not looking at our budget that way, then you have to ask the question, why am I being given this money? I get something needs to work, but they have to focus on getting the most out of that spend, especially today. You know what? Everybody who went to the cloud, I'm sure was like, this is great. We can move fast. This is the best thing ever. And then they got their first bill and they're like, hold on, what is this? And they're seeing line items going, I don't even know what this is. And you know, I remember looking through the bill at Starbucks going, these numbers are huge. Like, these are some really big numbers. And, you know, that's where I first am like, what are we using this for? Like, this is a big spend bucket. What are we doing here? And the first thing I thought of was, are we getting the value for this spend? And that's what it comes down to, Chris, is I'm going to put out a certain amount of money. What do I get for that? You know, and it's one thing for somebody to go, oh, you're going to get some compute. You're going to get, basically your application is going to run. Okay. And we accept it. And then we go away. And then the cloud keeps kind of going up and getting bigger. Well, with more users, you need more database. With more database, you need more storage. With more traffic, I need more security. So everything, you know, the success of your application or your e-commerce site or the work that you're doing in the cloud will correlate to cost. And if you don't understand that what the value looks like for the cost, and unit economics is probably one of the easiest terms to use when it comes down to that. What's my cost per customer? What's my cost per cup of coffee? What's my cost per? A lot of times we think that that's going to tell us something, but, and I've said that before, I really like to focus on the cost of failure. What's the cost of not having this goes down? So I start seeing value from two different perspectives, not just the cost per, but the cost of loss. If things go, if it stops working, if we don't have access to our site, what does that actually look like? So I think understanding value drives those kind of conversations around unit economics, but the value piece really comes down to, you know, conversations with our executive teams. They want to know, well, you know, what do we get for this? We're spending X amount of millions of dollars, but what does this give us? Okay, well, it allows all these applications to work. Great. That doesn't tell you cloud value, though. It doesn't tell you if you're getting, because you can still optimize. You can still be getting a value for it, but you might not be getting the maximum value. FinOps focuses on maximizing the value of your technology spend in the cloud. And that's the key, is that it focuses on maximizing, getting the very most out of your spend for the assets that you're paying for.
That it totally makes sense. I mean, you're talking in the millions. I mean, I got excited this week when I went to the grocery store and they had Christmas chocolate marked down to like 90% off. And so I was getting like, you know, $5 candy, like chocolate bars, like gourmet chocolate for like 50 cents. I'm like, that's crazy. I mean, it doesn't exactly work that way in the world of FinOps, assumedly.
No, it doesn't. But, you know, again, I think sometimes the value even of a FinOps practice, but certainly of the cloud, is more than just the dollar spent, is more than just the unit economics. So to sort of reiterate what I mentioned a moment ago, or sort of the beginning of this broadcast, is that flexibility and that visibility of infrastructure now is reaching across the organization. People who never had to care about technology spend other than it being sort of a fixed number on your P&L. You know, certainly for companies that were around prior to cloud and are not cloud native, they operated in data centers. Many of them still do today. And, you know, how it would work is, you know, application teams would say, we need this hardware that would be ordered, take, you know, however long, 3 months, 6 months, you know, during the sort of COVID crisis, it took upwards of 12 months for that hardware to arrive. Then it's got to be installed, so racked and stacked and hardened, and, you know, software installed, et cetera. There's a whole lot of work that goes into it. But if you look at the P&L of those products, it's a very flat number. You know, finance would just amortize it out over 3 or 5 or 7 years, whatever their schedule was, and no one really had to think about it. The downside of that was, if you had now hardware that was out of date, or you found didn't meet the needs of your applications, or, you know, your products and services, you were kind of stuck with that, or it took you just as long to replace that. And so the value of cloud is that you can replace things, you can upgrade in a matter of minutes or hours instead of those timelines of several months. And so that, to me, I think is really the value of the cloud itself, is providing that flexibility and that sort of never ending capacity for, you know, adding additional as well. So to me, the value is more than just proving out what a dollar gets you. It's having that flexibility to really remain both resilient, but also adaptable to market needs.
So as we talk about everything here, just to kind of put a finer point on it, how does Harness help with all of this?
That's a great question. You know what, I've been really, you know, I'm a big proactive guy. You know, the idea is, if I can optimize, or I can help save money, or we can figure out a way to, like Patrick said, the value isn't necessarily just about the dollar. It could be about the velocity of releasing applications, the ability to get to market sooner, the ability to get your product out there faster and further. The way that I see it is that Harness has, you know, they have like 17 products, which blew my mind when I came aboard, because I knew about some core functional ones. But from my perspective, the way I see it is that when you start utilizing the CI/CD, which again, the CI/CD product allows our developers to be able to not just go in and create their workloads and pipelines and be able to release, but it gives them things like one-click rollback. It gives them such great control, instead of having to go through and comb through scripts and having a fire drill on a Friday night where you're bringing everybody in or keeping everybody there to roll back what you just deployed. You know, those kind of nightmares go away. When you have everybody on the same platform, whether it's a senior developer who's using YAML or a junior developer who's using the Visual Studio, they're all doing it the same way. When you have, and again, I'm going to go back to, you know, highways and cars. When everybody is acting the same way, when it's pragmatic, when you know what the expectation is going to be, you have far less fire drills. You can respond faster to when you do have one. Like I said, one-click rollback. So the CI/CD product is fantastic because you can optimize at that level. If you use that along with our infrastructure as code management tool, this auto provisions all of the assets necessary for the application to work. So now you have the rules, the guardrails. You don't have to have engineering involved, because they're going to pre-approve. That's a tough one to say five times fast. It's going to pre-approve the guardrails. And Patrick had mentioned this earlier. When you have things already set up where they don't even need to think about it, they just need to worry about their app and deploying it. That is a huge thing to have to take away from an engineer who's trying to release an app. They're not worried about having to go and provision and get a hold of engineering, and will engineering approve it? Did they even get the service now? And now we got to follow up with them. When you have this tool, it now does all of that auto provisioning for you, because it's all been planned in advance. And then lastly, the cloud cost management tool that we have not only gives you visibility, which is great, it not only gives you asset governance, which is important, it gives you the ability to implement things like auto stopping. So if your non-prod environment is running consistently and you're like, I know this thing doesn't need to run during the weekend, and I'm not sure if the teams are doing anything about it, this tool will go and do that for you. And I've seen millions of dollars in savings in this space. It is there. Many companies are a little scared because they don't understand how it works. That's the key with the AI automation that we have. We've got, and Jody did, again, just a brilliant man who's built AI into every piece of the products that we have. Therefore, we have something that will allow you to be able to understand and not worry about interruption to your application. The technology's there. It also has things like Commitment Orchestrator. Starbucks had hundreds of commitments. It was challenging to manually be able to work through all of those and ensure that you're getting the highest value on your commitment. So utilizing a tool like a Commitment Orchestrator or a Kubernetes Orchestrator, again, Kubernetes is a very challenging thing. Containerization is great. It's wonderful for applications, but everything's so involved there, it can be really difficult to understand what am I paying for and what am I using? And again, this is something that Harness does really well. So again, when you take a CI/CD approach to optimizing your SKUs that are going to be used, you use auto provisioning that allows you to provision just what the applications need, no more, no less. And then you have a tool that gives you consistent understanding of, am I getting value for this? You've got the perfecta. And, you know, I go back to the Gartner conference comment. Harness is the only one that has this. There are a lot of CCM tools out there. None of them can do shift left.
And there's, you know, I would say the big three and more cloud service providers today have really matured their own sort of console native features for, you know, FinOps practices, like identifying anomalies or making recommendations for right sizing a particular compute or storage service, so that they're showing an effort to their customers on being cost conscious of every dollar that they're spending. But, you know, Harness, our CCM module, takes things like that even a step further. While we do surface some of the recommendations that the cloud providers make, because we recognize the value that they're bringing, and that even our customers want to see those recommendations as well, we sometimes take things a bit further. You can tune the recommendation. If you don't feel comfortable with, say, cutting something in half, you could reduce it by 25%. You'll get that code snippet, but which you copy and paste, unless you want to automate the deployment of that. And, you know, it will follow the instruction, take that tuning that you made, rewrite the code so that it's very seamless for the engineer to redeploy to a smaller instance. And, you know, the additional value that Harness brings in that space is, I'll give the example of one of our customers. They had, you know, been sifting through a number of recommendations that the Harness platform was making as far as their cloud infrastructure being over provisioned. And they were sick and tired of the approach, which was they would send these recommendations to their engineers, say, listen, it looks like you're only consuming 10, 20, 30% of this resource that you've deployed. Harness recommends that you size it down to 40%. Engineers would say, yeah, thanks for the recommendation. We're not going to do it. You know, we understand our infrastructure better than you do. Please don't bother us. Leave us alone. Well, their FinOps team went up the chain, sort of in a back channel, to their leadership and said, we want to try something kind of radical. And I'm certainly not advocating that everybody who's listening here today take this approach, but just to demonstrate the value of Harness's own proprietary machine learning. The FinOps team got the approval to make those changes without the application teams being aware. And so they made the changes, and they waited 2 or 3 weeks, and they kept a close eye on everything to make sure that nothing broke. And then one day they reached out to the application teams and said, hey, have you noticed any service degradations with your compute for your application? And the application team goes, no. And, you know, you haven't bothered me in a while about any recommendations. So, you know, everything to us is running just fine. And the FinOps team goes, oh, that's great. Well, we made those changes 3 weeks ago. That the ones that you had been ignoring are telling us that, we're not suitable for your workloads. Turns out they are. Can we like fully commit these, and then can we develop a working relationship so that when these sorts of recommendations come through again, we have a better approach or a different approach? And so that, I think, really demonstrates sort of the power of the Harness CCM product and sort of the way that it can change minds. Again, I wouldn't advocate that everybody go out and just make changes behind the scenes to their infrastructure without the appropriate teams knowing, but just demonstrates the power of our product.
Well, politically, yeah,
we will change this for you if you will not change it. My engineering background is like, that's what I'm like. And that's a great success story right there. And that's, I applaud any organization that does take that stance because, again, infrastructure owns the roads.
Mm-hmm.
Act accordingly, dictate what should be going on your roads, in your environment. That is where the win is. And I think more companies that do that are going to see that kind of win because, again, application teams, this isn't their specialty. Infrastructure teams, it is. When you're working with them in FinOps, they understand where you have that flexibility and where you can move. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there in it.
Well, it's almost like, and these are my words again, it's almost like without Harness, you're flying blind, driving blind. You've got stuff, but you don't know where it is. You don't know where.
That's really no fault of the engineers or even, the CFOs of a company, right? Cloud introduced a whole new way of working.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden gave them a whole laundry list of new job responsibilities. And, so now folks in finance have to understand what the technologists are saying and vice versa. And, without having just that basic realization that, hey, the world is different and we need to maybe change our approach, it's going to be a very difficult problem that may go unsolved for years. And so, again, it all comes down to the approach more than just like how much money can we save, but it's more about how do we work together to ensure that we're getting the right value out of our cloud spend and our cloud usage.
Yeah, I don't see that going away anytime soon.
Not
I mean, if anything, like it seems like it's going to be increasing with costs being what they might be. We're going to be living more and more in the cloud.
Yeah, we've at Harness, we've established a pretty opinionated point of view about cloud spend. We're still tallying the numbers for 2025, but in 2024, companies around the world on the three largest cloud providers spent well over $300 billion on cloud infrastructure alone. And that represents over that 5-year period, roughly a 30% rate of growth year over year. And if you double click that number, that 30%, you'll see that over the last 5 years, it has come down. At the very beginning of that period, it was about 67% year over year growth. And between 2023 to 2024, it was about 20% of growth. So, it's certainly trending down, but it's still a significant driver of cost increases for almost any organization. The one number that really hasn't changed over that 5-year period is what companies report as being waste on their cloud bill. Roughly 2/3 of companies that were surveyed by major industry analysts said that they are experiencing some amount of waste on their bill. Some can't quantify it, but those that could, it was anywhere from 27 to 35%, and on average, about 30%. And again, that number has stayed consistent, even though the rate of adoption of cloud is starting to decline. The amount that companies are wasting on their cloud bill every month has stayed really consistent over time.
So to kind of wrap things up, if you had one thing to explain to those who are listening, whether live or in the recording, one thing that you really want them to know about FinOps, what would that be? Maybe a misconception, clearing up a misconception, or something that they hadn't, or most people don't necessarily consider about FinOps.
Yeah, it's not just a tool, and it's not just a way for people communicating. It's certainly unification of tools, practice, people, but ensuring that everybody who comes to the table, A, that they show up, B, that they They agree on these are the things that matter to us when we look at our cloud utilization, and how do we address problems that may or may not arise in the future. Again, how do we make sure that we're doing it together and in a way that we all agree is in the best interest of the company?
Ben?
You know what, I don't know about misconception. I think the idea is, and I love this statistic, in 2023, 9 of the top Fortune 100 companies had FinOps. In 2025, it's 94 of the top 100 Fortune companies. So it tells you right there that companies are now actively looking and pursuing ways to find the highest value. I think that more companies need to really look at this and understand how they're enabling their own internal folks to be able to do this successfully. It requires a top-down support. Your C-levels, your executive leadership teams, your senior leadership teams all need to understand that this falls to them. It rolls up to them ultimately because this is money spent. If they're not focused on trying to get the highest value out of it, then you got to understand, like Patrick mentioned, there's such a huge amount of waste. And if you're not putting any focus on this, you're allowing this to happen. And that's, to me, is probably one of the bigger concerns is if you're not actively going after it, then you're allowing it. And if you're allowing it, I think they would all be shocked. Anybody who's not doing this would be shocked to see what that number actually is, because I'm sure it's much more than what they expect. But I think the idea is FinOps helps drive business value. And that, to me, is something, it's not about just saving money. It's driving business value. You've got 2 approaches. Build yourself. Go with the solution. You can build yourself. I've done that. However, it's going to take time. It's going to take internal investment. It's going to take headcount, and you're going to have to get a few different types of resources. It's not just going to be a straight engineer. It's not going to be a finance guy. It's going to be a developer, a data engineer. So you're now having to bring all that internally, which is great. I've seen it done. However, if you want to accelerate that, and instead of building something over the course of 6, 8, 12 months, within 30 to 60 days, you can start saving money and find yourself literally in a position to mitigate the waste. You can focus on delivering the value. And that's kind of what all of these solutions really focus on, right? Is acceleration, driving value, helping companies be able to run a practice without having to staff a huge practice. And it all depends. It's relevant to the size of your company. But the important thing that people should really understand is that FinOps is value. That's what it's trying to show. That's what it's dictating. It saves money through these practices and principles that we get from the foundation itself. And as I've mentioned, I think Harness does a really exceptional job of that. They have the right products. They've got the right people. It's been 6 months, I think, since Patrick and I made the transition from practitioner to advisor. And it's something that we both talk about regularly. This was just a really unique and fun opportunity to help more companies. And I know Patrick and I have both had a lot of chats and a lot of great conversations, but that's one of the things that I think I enjoy most myself is helping other organizations either continue to build, evolve, or mature their practice and where they're at. Because I know that an outside perspective can always bring a little bit more perspective than I have myself. And so I would always welcome that from anybody else. I never had anybody from any companies doing it when I was a practitioner. So I really see the value, and I appreciate our customers who do too.
Well, the one thing I'm grateful for is that you allowed me to have this conversation with y'all, to learn a bit more, to provide insight for those who were listening. I do appreciate the time and the expertise, because they say you should learn something every day. Learn something new every day. This is me learning something new.
That's awesome, Chris. Well, I appreciate you hosting this. These are a blast. I know Patrick and I have a lot of fun on these things, and we love the conversation. It's a topic that we're very passionate about.
I can tell, like you both bleed it. Like it doesn't sound just like a job or a role for you. It sounds like you not to say you drank the Kool-Aid, like you really, this is something fundamental, and it's changing. I'm not going to go as far as say changing lives, but changing businesses and the prospects of those businesses being able to find value where it's sitting already. You're just surfacing it better.
Yep. It's the mission, right? It's the mission. Help as many as we can.
Well, even though I'm not a multi-million billion-dollar enterprise, you helped me just a little bit understand. So I appreciate it. Again, Patrick, Ben, it was good speaking with you. I know that Vicky's been sharing a ton of links in the chat. Feel free to click through on every one of those. If you were watching live, this will be available after the fact as a recording. If you're watching the recording, well, guess what? You just watched a recording. Again, I'm Chris Perillo on behalf of the New Stack team. And I got to thank Harness again for making this possible, and the two FinOps domain experts for joining, Ben Linares and Patrick Brogan. Everybody, thanks again. See you soon.
Thank you guys. Take care.